So I was not scheduled to be the talker today, the decider or whatever, but it was supposed to be Rodolfo and Perla because they're working on a joint presentation on the experience of being free thinkers in Latino culture, which is actually a topic we haven't explored yet, but they went and got married or something and are busy. So they're gonna, we've rescheduled them for March 20th. And so one of the reasons I'm here is to step in when we need, a talk. So this is something, I'm just gonna share some ideas I've been working on, like in my journal and stuff, and this would be an opportunity to work through that with you. And so it started for me a couple of weeks ago. After Oasis, I stopped at Fiesta to buy some sherry because I was making coq van. And at least for me, when a recipe calls for wine, my personal theory of cooking is the more the better. So if it calls for wine, I'm going to put in wine and sherry and cognac and then light it on fire. Makes everything taste better. Try it. It really good. It works with everything. And so anyway, so I'm standing in line. I got my bottle of sherry. I'm standing in line, and I get to the cashier. She's like, well, "You can't buy this." I'm like, "What? I buy it here all the time." And said, "No, you can't buy this stuff on Sunday." I'm like, "What?" And that's when I got a little lecture on Texas state alcohol law, which apparently you can buy beer and wine only after 12 noon on Sunday, but you can't buy anything stronger, like sherry or port, or, we're not talking like distilled liquor, but it's fortified wines, who knows who thinks this stuff up. And so while the Fiesta cashier lady was explaining this to me, the people waiting in line behind me are clearly, they're giving me this kind of disapproving look, like, well, look at this lush buying booze on a Sunday kind of thing. I thought someone was handing me a card for, a group to go to, but anyway. So, no sherry on Sunday. Why is that? Well, ultimately, it has to do with the guy we're going to talk about today, a guy named John Calvin. I guess you could go all the way back and blame it on Jesus, but I'm going to stick with John Calvin. Now, this is a gross oversimplification, and there's a little bit of material here that I've covered before, but I figured remedial work is never bad, because we have to get some of this work out of the way to go where I want us to go with this. But just for a little refresher, okay, so at the time of the Protestant Reformation in the 1500s, you had the two main branches, and this is an oversimplification. Thank you. You had like the Lutheran branch, and then you had the Calvinist or the Reformed branch. And the Calvinists, of course, get their name from John Calvin. John Calvin made his base in the city of Geneva, where he essentially tried to build a theocracy. Well, he and his cohorts, a theocracy, where that would be governed by biblical law. Now, just to give you a little contrast of the Calvinist/Reformed Reformation versus the Lutheran side of it, Martin Luther was once quoted as saying, "I would rather be ruled by a smart Turk than a stupid Christian." Which is kind of interesting, because I know a lot of Americans today, to get back to Daniel's thing, that would not think that way. I'd rather be ruled by a smart Muslim than a stupid Christian. So that's different, but that would not fly in Geneva because it was a theocracy where church and state were one. So they wanted you to be Christian leaders no matter what. Now, Calvinism came to America. Calvinism came to America with four groups, like the English Puritans, the Dutch Reformed people who settled where? New Amsterdam, which became New York. And then the French... yeah, but in America we call them the Huguenots. Okay. I don't know how to do French. Francois, how would you say that?
She said it right.
She said it right? I'm impressed. Cool. I'm not going to try that. And then finally, the Scots-Irish Presbyterians who settled in Appalachia. with the result that in colonial days, most of the settlers in New England and the mid-Atlantic area of North America were Calvinists. The overwhelming majority were Calvinists. So here's a quick overview, and we need to know this to talk about America today. Quick overview of Calvinist theology. They talk about the 5 points of Calvinism. And we use the acronym TULIP. It's called TULIP theology. The reason it says TULIP, well, I like TULIP because tulips come from the Netherlands, and there are a lot of Reformed Calvinists, a lot of Calvinists there. So the T in TULIP stands for total depravity. We're going to unpack this in a second. Okay. Sounds like some of you were in favor of that. Okay, U is for unconditional.
Total depravity.
Conditional depravity. You guys. Unconditional election. That's actually okay. L is for limited. This is turned into Mad Libs. Limited atonement, and then finally. No, it's not finally. Okay, I is for irresistible. And then finally, P is for the perseverance. This reminded me of Robert's song. Perseverance of the saints. There. Okay. So that's your TULIP. Okay. So total depravity is basically all humanity is enslaved to sin. We are in utter, complete rebellion against God, and the only fate that any human being deserves from the get-go is eternal punishment in hell. Okay, that's the only fate we deserve. That's the starting. That's like the starting anthropology in Calvinism. Okay, unconditional election. For reasons known only to God, God has decided who is going to be saved and who is going to be damned. And it's not based on works that you've done. And this unconditional election not only happened before you were born, it happened before the creation of the world. Before the world was even created, the sovereign God had already decided who was going to be part of the elect, part of the saved, or also called the saints, or part of the non-elect. And there's not a damn thing you can do about it. It's a done deal. Limited atonement, this is kind of interesting, that the Jesus' sacrificial death on the cross only atones for some of humanity. It's not meant to atone for all of humanity, only meant for the elect. Irresistible grace is basically, I don't spend too much time on this, basically nothing can frustrate God's sovereign will, ever. And then perseverance of the saints means, have you heard the phrase once saved, always saved? That comes out of this notion, perseverance of the saints. Once you're elect, you can't be unelected. Okay? That's a pretty good summary. And, it sounds pretty severe. And a lot of, modern day Presbyterians, they're a pretty mild bunch. They don't go in for some of this stuff anymore. There are a lot of really liberal Presbyterians, but there's still a lot of hardcore Calvinists out there. In fact, there's a neo-Calvinist movement in America that is strangely attracting young people. So I don't get it. So anyway, that's now in practical terms. And I think I'm going to put this down for now. How this played out in daily life was for our early colonists in the Mid-Atlantic and New England, because of the strict doctrine of unconditional election there's another word here. The unconditional, there's a, prelapsarian double predestination is the technical.
No, raise you 100.
Okay, prelapsarian means before the fall. Prelapsarian double predestination is the technical theological term for unconditional election. It's a word you will never use. I'm just sharing it with you because I'm a little bit unhappy that I have spent much of my life cramming this into my hard drive and this useless information. But anyway, so because of this strict doctrine of all-encompassing predestination, the central question of daily Calvinist life was, who was saved, who wasn't saved? Who was part of the elect, who was part of the damned? Because everybody intermingles. And even within the church, just because you were in the church didn't mean that you were necessarily part of the elect. And they spent a lot of time asking this question. How do we know? Because Puritans talked about it in the journals that they left behind. And one common thread of thought back then was, well, if a person is successful, materially successful, they're making money, they're prosperous, probably a pretty good sign that they are part of the elect. It's a sign of God's favor. But if you're having all kinds of, you're sick, and you have bad kids, and all kinds of your crops fail, that's probably a sign you're not in the elect. And so one of the results of that was that they would work really, really hard to make as much money as they could to show that they were successful, to get other people around them to think, oh, yeah, they're in the elect. They're the saved. Okay? And as a result of that, New England colonies generally thrived. They were prosperous. The famous German economist Max Weber in 1905 coined the term Protestant work ethic to describe kind of the economic impact of this Calvinist approach to life. It's fascinating if you just look up Protestant work ethic if you want to explore that more. It's an interesting tie-in to Calvinism and economics. So that's the kind of daily result of this focus on election and predestination. Secondly, their life was marked by general suspicion of fun and frivolity. People worked hard 6 days a week, and on Sunday you spent most of it where? In church, which went on almost all day, and the sermons lasted for hours. Attendance was compulsory. If you nodded off, they had someone to prod you awake. And most of the Puritans had done away with musical instruments in their worship, so you didn't even have good tunes. They like to keep you engaged. Also, the New England colonies banned many forms of secular entertainment, like maypoles and dancing and theater and games of chance and even Christmas. They banned Christmas in the Massachusetts colony, and pretty much throughout New England, Christmas was not celebrated again until in New England on a regular basis until the mid-1800s, after all those loosey-goosey Catholics came around. That's when, it was mid-1800s is when Christmas kind of took off in New England again. So early New England was, for the most part, a theocracy, just like what John Calvin had tried to set up in Geneva. And these ideas that I'm sharing with you are in the DNA of our national formation. And I happen to believe that traces of these ideas are still floating around in the drinking water today. I think we see the fingerprints of Calvinism everywhere. Even if you are a secularist and a free thinker, I think we can't help but imbibe some of subtle Calvinist thinking, which we're going to talk about a bit. And just because if you're an American, you are an accidental Calvinist. And Calvinism has had far more impact in the United States. I think it's one of the things that explains why we are so different from other industrialized democracies. Of course, I can't prove any of this, but I have strong hunches, and I'd like to hear, what you have to say in a bit. So anyway, so how do we see the fingerprints of Calvinism today? Here are some of my thoughts. If you begin a nation with the assumption that all people are totally depraved and only deserve eternal punishment, and then people don't really deserve anything else, whether it's access to health care or a living wage or food stamps, nothing. Because all we ever deserve is hell. Now, what I'm going to say is, I don't think a lot of us believe it that severely. I'm saying this is like, these are like the after effect shock waves of puritanical Calvinism. I'm not saying, and I don't think you have to be a theist to buy into some of this stuff. I know non-theists that believe people don't deserve anything. If it is widely believed that money and material success are signs of divine favor, proof that you are part of God's elect, God's chosen, then economically disadvantaged people are poor because of God's disapproval, right? They deserve it. It's just part of the plan. Accept it. And conversely, if the wealthy are wealthy, they're wealthy because God or the forces of the universe or whomever ordained it. If you start a colony as a Puritan leader, like John Winthrop with the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1630, famously talked about their community as being like a shining city upon a hill. That's how the phrase kind of got into American, discourse, although it comes from the Bible, from the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5. But if you go from the origins, believing that you were there as a shining city upon a hill, it's not hard to see how that can lead to things like manifest destiny, American exceptionalism. Politicians from JFK to Ronald Reagan have used the term, John Winthrop's term, the city upon a hill, to describe America. And I think we Americans, often even secular Americans, can't help but feel that our nation is special, has some kind of special role to play in the world. The sense of exceptionalism, which often translates into imposing our will on others. If you start a nation with a profound suspicion of fun, frivolity, and the enjoyment of life, that might explain why we take fewer vacation days than just about anybody except for Japan. Because it's not even close. Like, everybody I know in Europe gets like weeks of vacation, and they all take it. If you start a notion, then also I think I might explain our lack of paid family leave, sick leave, and other policies that are common elsewhere. There was an initiative, I heard about this on NPR recently, an initiative in Colorado a couple years ago that was funded by one foundation. It was a kind of experimental test program to make contraception, I believe it was specifically IUDs, widely available to disadvantaged women and teens throughout the state of Colorado, like free. And it was funded by a foundation. And they implemented this program, made the free IUDs available, and the results were astonishing. Dramatic drop in the teen birth rate, dramatic drop in the abortion rate, which you think people would be happy about. So they got to the end of the test stage of the program. The money from the foundation had run out, but they had proved its success and now wanted to sell this to the legislature, saying, this is clearly a success. We have to keep funding this now as a state because it's had such an impact. And the last I heard, the legislature turned it down. Despite the fact that implementing it would have actually saved the state money with all the teen births that weren't happening. They balked at it basically because they saw the distribution of free contraception as encouraging immoral behavior. Okay? To me, that's the fingerprints of Calvinism. So it's really not just about abortion after all, is it? It's also, we don't want people to enjoy life or to be normal human beings.
Sounds like the Taliban.
Yeah, kind of like that.
Like what? Like what?
Like the Taliban. I didn't say that. That's So I think, and I see this too, like, how, like we see each other, a lot of us see each other once a week and we'll say, how are you doing? How was your week? The most common phrase I hear describing how our week was busy. I was so busy. I'm just so busy these days, right? It's like a sin to not be busy. No one ever says, I've just been kind of loafing around, watching Star Trek, So, that sense of the mandate to be perceived as busy and industrious. I think that might be lingering Calvinism. I don't know about you, but I think that we have a chance to do something here. I think the 5 core values might be a nice counterpoint to the 5 principles of Calvinism. It's clearly resonating with people. And I really think people are more important than beliefs is a hell of a lot better than total depravity. And so I think we're onto something big. Of course, it's going to take a long time, but I think we all need a bit of deprogramming also from Calvinism. At last week's Sunday gathering, we had another milestone where we presented a newborn Oasis, 9-day-old Xander, back in, and we, did the baby presentation to the community, and as his dad, as Dennis raised Xander up and presented him, you all were, applauding for him, and for me it just felt right, because you see, I've been in that situation before, and we used to have to talk about how this child was born into sin, or was stained by original sin, needed to have sins washed away, and last Sunday felt so good because it was just like this moment of pure goodness. For this, just basking in the miracle of a new life in our midst. And if the birth of a child isn't a miracle, I don't know what is. And it was so wonderful just to welcome him in without all those preconceived notions about salvation and damnation and that kind of stuff. And people have often asked me if we're going to adopt rituals in the Oasis movement, for special life passages and stuff like that. And my first answer is, well, we already have rituals. Our mid-morning coffee break is a ritual. The fact that it lasts about 10 minutes is a ritual. The fact that we start at 10:36-ish, that is a ritual. You see, humans are inherently, we are ritualistic creatures. We develop rituals in our families, in our relationships, and organizations. Everybody has, the rituals are going to come about. You can't escape ritual. But my thing is, because they come about organically, there's no need to make fake rituals because they're going to happen. You never have to worry about rituals not developing because they're going to develop. And I'd rather just hang out and see what happens. When you see the Pope celebrating High Mass at St. Peter's on Christmas Eve, and it's like the gold and the incense and the art, it's just astonishing. It's this massive visual display. You gotta realize, nobody ever sat down and designed what the Mass was gonna look like. The whole thing started with a simple neighborhood potluck supper in Corinth or someplace, in a Greco-Roman home. And then one day somebody said, oh, let's have candles, okay? And eventually the candlesticks got bigger, and they got better tablecloth, maybe up the quality of the wine, and then maybe the pre-meal prayer got a little bit longer, and then a little bit longer, and then they said, let's have a post-meal prayer too, let's have one in the middle, and then someone decided to bring funny party hats. And then over 2,000 years, that's what you end up with. It's the evolution of culture. It's a type of evolution. It's a little bit. So we're at the beginnings of when Dennis brought Xander up last week, we didn't think through our first baby presentation. I ran to the children's room during the coffee break and said, Dennis, we want to introduce a baby. He said, okay. So he runs in here and he looks at me, I look at him, he's like, what do you want me to do? I was like, I don't know. He says, should I do Lion King? I said, yeah, do Lion King. And then when he did that, I said, I thought, oh my gosh, I can already see where this is going. Because next time we do this, Gosha, I believe, had suggested, okay, we're going to play the Lion King music next time. Maybe 100 years from now, when Oasis communities are doing a baby presentation, everybody will be chanting Simba. Somebody will ask, hey, what's Simba? I don't know, just something we say when a kid is presented, Thank you, that's all I got. Any comments on the Calvinism thing? Like anything that you saw in that list of kind of the cultural fingerprints of Calvinism that still resonated with you? And then Pat, and then back there, and then Gosha, and then TC. Yeah.
Maybe I just missed it. What was the irresistible grace part?
Irresistible grace is the belief that God's sovereign will cannot be denied or thwarted. It's like God's will prevails no matter what. So don't ask me to defend any of this. I'm just explaining to you, okay? And I'm not going to try to make sense of it. TC.
You were singing the song of my people, for I was a Presbyterian once.
Oh. They're very mild.
The talk that I
Calvinists.
gave a few weeks ago on reproductive freedom and all of the events that led up to the first sort of unfortunate condition I found myself in was a direct result of those conditions. And I recognized every one of them in the doctrines that the Presbyterian church I was raised in was promoting.
Yeah.
And it was about, you have to be perfect and you will receive no reward for being so.
Yeah.
And if you should be imperfect, you will receive your punishment.
Mm-hmm.
And that is so ingrained, and I've just never heard it spelled out like that.
Okay.
But yeah, that's
Cool.
the stuff.
So that resonates with you.
Yeah.
Good. Gosha has something then. Okay.
Yeah. Just 2 words, prosperity doctrine. Really explains all of that.
Yeah, no, prosperity gospel.
Yeah.
Is, I think a clear.
Yeah, it just very
descendant of
slightly
this.
evolves from that, yeah.
Yes, they focus on one aspect of that and kind of neglect the poverty side. But yeah, it is clearly, I think, one very modern, very widely held kind of Christian belief that is directly related to that.
Right.
Okay.
You were talking about fingerprints and
Yeah.
where you would see those fingerprints, and it made me think of like the prudeness of our culture.
Oh, yeah.
Over sexualization.
All of the above.
And
Yeah.
like problems with the breastfeeding
Yep.
controversy and things like that. I think that's where.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, Trevor, and then Gary, and then we'll probably have to wrap it up.
I was also going to mention how we view addiction
Oh.
as a personal character failure and
Uh-huh.
not as an illness.
Oh, the war on drugs. Huge
Oh,
connection.
okay.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Treating addiction as a moral failure, the very punitive. We are a very punitive society. I think more so than it's like we want to punish and shame people rather than help them in general. And the war on drugs is a perfect example of that. I do believe there's a connection between the war on drugs and this kind of mentality. Yeah, Gary.
The other place it's very prevalent is in racism in the U.S. The other races were fallen.
Oh yeah,
And,
racism. He says. Yeah.
And so they're already damned, so it doesn't matter what you do to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's all the way through to the way we treat the poor and
Mhm.
anybody who's different. And they came here to make it pure.
Yeah. Right. We went to school. We were taught they came for religious freedom. But yeah, theirs. But they came to set up a theocracy. Yeah. Good. Well, thanks for the discussion.